My older brother, Ethan, who is 9 years my senior, offered me a place to stay with him and his wife, Sarah. At that time, I was overwhelmed with gratitude, and honestly, who wouldn't be in my shoes? The cost of rent in the city was astronomical, far beyond what my meager paycheck could handle, making the idea of living alone a distant dream. Ethan owned a lovely house with a spare bedroom, and he generously told me I could stay for as long as I needed to get my finances in order and stand on my own 2 feet. It felt like a true lifeline, a chance to catch my breath, so I eagerly moved in with them. I understood this wasn't a permanent arrangement, and I was determined to pull my own weight. I never wanted to feel like a burden, so I made it my mission to contribute in any way I could. I took over most of the cooking, handled the daily cleaning, and ran errands whenever they needed something. Financially, my contribution was small at first, as I could barely afford my own essentials, but I chipped in whenever I had any extra cash. If I had a little left over from my paycheck, I'd use it to buy groceries for the house or other shared necessities. Initially, I believed things were going remarkably well. The whole situation felt almost perfect. Sarah seemed pleasant enough, and Ethan and I had always shared a close bond, so I felt genuinely comfortable and at home. While Sarah and I weren't exactly best friends, I never sensed any overt tension or problems between us. She was generally quiet and kept to herself, but I didn't take it personally. She was pregnant at the time, so I chalked her reserved nature up to the stresses and hormones of pregnancy, assuming she was just navigating her own internal world. However, after about 6 months, a subtle shift began to occur, and things started to feel strange. The weirdness began in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Sarah would drop subtle hints, comments disguised as casual observations. For example, she'd say, "Oh, when the baby arrives, we're going to need so much more room." Or she'd muse aloud, "I wonder if we should start thinking about how to convert the guest room into a proper nursery soon." I started to get the distinct feeling that she wanted me to leave, but Ethan would always reassure me, saying things like, "Don't worry about it, man. You can stay as long as you need." I took him at his word because he was my brother, my own flesh and blood. Why would I ever have a reason to doubt him? But then, the comments escalated, becoming less subtle and more direct. Sarah started complaining more openly, making statements like, "It's going to be really challenging having a newborn in the house with a third person living here." I wasn't trying to overstay my welcome, not by a long shot, but I genuinely didn't have another place to go at that exact moment. By this point, I had finally landed a stable, better-paying job, but I hadn't yet saved enough money to just pack my bags and secure a new apartment on a whim. The situation took a dramatic and unforgettable turn one afternoon. The memory is as clear in my mind today as if it happened yesterday. Sarah was sitting in the living room, and I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch. Ethan was still at work. Out of the blue, Sarah started a conversation with me. She told me flatly that she was unhappy with me living there, that my presence was disturbing her peace of mind, and that she didn't feel safe with some of the people I associated with. I was completely baffled. What people? I rarely went out, and when I did, it was usually with colleagues from work or a couple of old friends from college. Sarah then said, I heard from Ethan that some of your friends are involved in things like drugs, and I just can't have that kind of influence around my baby." I was floored, utterly speechless. I'm not even remotely connected to anyone involved in that kind of lifestyle. I told her as much, but she just shrugged her shoulders, as if she possessed some secret knowledge that I wasn't privy to. I remember the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was so sudden and baseless. Still, I tried to rationalize it, assuming she was just overly stressed because of the pregnancy. I attempted to let it go, but that wasn't the end of it. After that conversation, Sarah's demeanor grew even colder. She would give me these looks, these piercing glares as if my very presence was an inconvenience. She barely spoke to me unless it was to drop more passive-aggressive hints about me leaving. I knew something was fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to believe she would just fabricate stories about me. This was my brother's wife, after all. Why would she resort to lying? A few weeks later, Ethan also started acting distant, which was completely out of character for him. One evening, I asked him if everything was okay, and he just gave a vague reply. Sarah's been under a lot of pressure lately. He didn't offer any specifics, but the atmosphere in the house felt heavy and strange, as if he was concealing something. I didn't want to push the issue, so as Sarah became increasingly aloof, I didn't think too much of it. I figured she just needed her space or was dealing with her own personal matters. But then she started making these little comments, remarks that, in hindsight, were clearly designed to push me out without her having to say the words directly. She'd mention how small the house felt all of a sudden, or how she needed more room for the baby's things. She once joked, "Maybe you'll be moving out before the baby arrives, right?" And then laughed it off as if it were a harmless jest. I remember forcing a laugh along with her, but deep down, a voice in my head was screaming, "Wait, is she being serious?" It wasn't just the comments, though. Her avoidance became more pronounced. If I entered the living room, she would promptly get up and move to another room. I made attempts to engage her, to ask about her pregnancy or if she needed anything, but she would just give me short, dismissive answers. I was beginning to feel like an invisible man in my own brother's house. The strangest part was that Ethan never seemed to pick up on any of it. He was so wrapped up in preparations for the baby and their future plans that he was completely oblivious to the drama unfolding right under his nose. Then came the day Sarah accused me of flirting with her. I still struggle to wrap my head around it. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Ethan was at his job, and I had the day off, so I decided to do a deep clean of the house, trying to be helpful since I was living there rent-free. Sarah was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, seemingly lost in her own world. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters when she called out, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I walked over, assuming she needed help with something, but the expression on her face was odd. She didn't look angry, but there was a strange gravity to her demeanor, as if she was about to deliver some life-altering news. She started fidgeting with her phone and said, "I've noticed that I don't know how to phrase this, but you've been acting kind of flirty with me." I felt like I had been plunged into ice water. For a moment, I was completely paralyzed, unsure of what to say because the accusation was so far out of left field. Flirting with her, I let out a nervous chuckle, assuming it had to be some kind of bizarre joke. "Wait, what? Flirting with you? That's crazy, Sarah." But her face remained dead serious. "No, I'm not kidding. Ethan mentioned it to me as well. He said he's noticed it for a while now." That's when my stomach dropped to the floor. Ethan noticed it. What on earth was she talking about? I had never, not for a single second, thought of Sarah in that way. She was my brother's wife, for crying out loud. The very idea of flirting with her was repulsive and absurd. "Sarah, I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I wouldn't, that's not," but she cut me off. "Look, I'm just telling you how I feel, and frankly, it's making me uncomfortable. I don't think it's a good idea for you to be living here anymore, especially with the baby on the way." The room felt like it was tilting on its axis. I didn't know how to respond. How do you possibly defend yourself against an accusation for something that never happened? I wanted to scream, to protest, but I just stood there in a state of absolute shock. "Ethan said that." I finally managed to ask. She nodded, but the way she did it felt off, as if she wasn't telling the whole truth, but I couldn't pinpoint what was missing. The rest of that conversation is a blur. Sarah kept repeating that it wasn't personal, and that it was just for the well-being of their growing family. But all I could hear was that she wanted me gone. The whole flirting allegation was the weapon she used, and I had no way to disprove it. The fact that she claimed Ethan had also noticed it was what hurt the most. My own brother, thinking I was hitting on his pregnant wife. It made absolutely no sense. After that day, the tension in the house became unbearable. Sarah ceased all communication with me, and Ethan acted as though everything was normal, but I could tell he knew something was wrong. I tried to bring it up with him one night, but he just brushed me off, saying, "Sarah's just really stressed with the pregnancy. Don't take it personally." Don't take it personally. How could I not when his wife was accusing me of something so despicable? It got even worse when Sarah started telling Ethan that I was associating with bad people. She told him that some of my friends used drugs and that she didn't want me around the baby if I was going to bring that kind of element into their home. The truth is, I hardly ever had friends over. I had almost no social life because I was so focused on working and saving money to move out. But Sarah had somehow convinced Ethan that I was running with a dangerous crowd. I don't know if Ethan actually believed her or if he just didn't want to deal with the confrontation, but he began acting distant and strange around me as well. He'd come home from work and barely acknowledge my presence as if I were a stranger. Sarah had clearly gotten into his head, but every time I tried to discuss it, he would shut me down. "Just give Sarah some space," he'd say. "She's going through a lot right now." Nothing I said mattered. Sarah had already made up her mind, and she was using every tool at her disposal to force me out, with my own brother as her accomplice. It was like watching someone methodically build a criminal case against you for a crime you didn't commit, and you're completely powerless to stop it. By this point, I knew my time there was limited. I had already been searching for apartments, but the rental market was brutal. I had very few options, and the last thing I wanted was to end up homeless. I was trying my best to be patient and not cause any more friction. But deep down, I knew Sarah was gearing up for her final move. And when it came, I had no idea if Ethan would have my back or side with her. And then it finally happened. I knew it was coming, but the impact still knocked the wind out of me. Sarah had been building towards this moment for weeks, and I suppose I was naively hoping that Ethan would finally step in and put a stop to it, but he never did. I had just gotten home after another grueling day at my new job, completely exhausted and just wanting to unwind. As I walked through the front door, the house was unusually quiet. It was an unnerving silence, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up because you know something is wrong, even if you can't see it yet. As I walked towards my room, I saw it. All of my belongings, clothes, books, personal items, were packed into cardboard boxes and trash bags, piled in the hallway like garbage waiting for collection. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart began to pound in my chest, and for a fleeting moment I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe Sarah was doing some extreme spring cleaning, or maybe Ethan was rearranging the furniture. But deep down I knew better. This was no misunderstanding. I walked into the living room to find Ethan sitting on the couch, his head buried in his hands. He didn't look at me at first, just sat there in a suffocating silence. Sarah was nowhere in sight, conveniently leaving him to do her dirty work. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm despite the storm of anger and betrayal brewing inside me. Ethan let out a heavy sigh and finally looked up at me, his face etched with an expression of pity, like a child caught doing something he knew was wrong. "Karen, she thinks it's time for you to move out," he said. His voice was a mere whisper, as if he was ashamed to even say the words aloud. I couldn't process it. "Are you serious? You're kicking me out just like that? After everything?" He didn't even try to defend his actions. He just nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It's not like that," he mumbled. "It's just Sarah's stressed with the pregnancy and she feels uncomfortable with you here, with everything that's been going on." Everything that's been going on. What did that even mean? I had done absolutely nothing wrong. I had been a model house guest. All I did was exist in their house, help out, and keep to myself. And now I was being evicted because Sarah felt uncomfortable. It was complete and utter nonsense. Ethan knew it too, but he wasn't going to stand up to her. It was crystal clear now. "So that's it. You're just going to throw me out on the street?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "Based on some lies Sarah has been feeding you, I've done nothing but help you guys, Ethan, you know that." Ethan stood up, running a hand through his hair, still avoiding my eyes. "I'm not throwing you on the street," he said. "I'll help you find a place. We can cover your security deposit, maybe the first month's rent. It's not like we're abandoning you. Not abandoning me." It felt like the very definition of abandonment. I wasn't asking for his money. I was asking for some semblance of loyalty, for my own brother to have my back instead of caving the moment his wife manufactured some drama. Sarah said I was flirting with her, Ethan. She said I was hanging out with dangerous people. "Do you actually believe any of that?" I pleaded, desperate for some sign that he knew the truth. He didn't answer right away, and his silence was more damning than any words could have been. He either believed her or was too cowardly to challenge her. Either way, I was on my own. "Look," he finally said, "Sarah's been really stressed, and with the baby coming, we just need more peace in the house. You've been a great help, and I appreciate everything, but this is what's best for everyone." Best for everyone? What about what was best for me? I wanted to scream, but I knew it was futile. Sarah had won, and Ethan wasn't going to fight her on it. I was being cast out, and there was nothing I could do. I stood there for a long moment, trying to absorb the reality of the situation. Part of me wanted to just storm out and never speak to them again, but I had nowhere to go. I didn't have the savings for a new place yet, and I certainly had no other family to turn to, not after this. Ethan was the one person I thought I could always count on, and that bridge was now engulfed in flames right before my eyes. "When do I have to be out?" I asked, my voice flat and defeated. Ethan shifted uncomfortably on his feet. "Karen was hoping by the end of the week," he replied, almost apologetically. The end of the week. That was 4 days. 4 miserable days to find a new home, move my life, and figure out how to survive on my own. "Right," I muttered, shaking my head in disbelief. "Thanks for the warning, I guess." I turned and walked back to the hallway where my life was piled up in boxes. I could feel Ethan's eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. What was the point? His mind was made up, and Sarah held all the cards. I started picking up my boxes, carrying them back into my room, my mind racing as I tried to figure out my next move. The next few days were a frantic blur of searching for apartments and calling anyone I knew who might let me crash for a little while. It was a humbling and difficult process. Rent was expensive, and I hadn't saved nearly enough to afford anything decent. A part of me kept hoping Ethan would have a change of heart, that he'd talk to Sarah and realize how profoundly unfair this all was. But every time I saw them, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Sarah completely ignored me, acting as if I was already gone. Ethan, on the other hand, pretended as if everything was perfectly normal, which was almost more insulting. By Friday, I still hadn't found a place. I was packing the last of my things, fighting back tears when Ethan knocked on my door. He stood there awkwardly for a moment, holding an envelope. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "It's for the security deposit and first month's rent. I hope this helps." I took the envelope without a word. I didn't want his guilt money. What I wanted was for my brother to stand up for me, to tell Sarah she was wrong and that I didn't deserve this. But I knew that was a fantasy. I left that weekend with my boxes and bags, feeling more isolated than I had ever felt in my life. Ethan barely managed a goodbye. Sarah didn't even show her face. I had been erased from their lives as if I'd never been there at all. After being kicked out of Ethan's house, the following months were spent in pure survival mode. With nowhere to go initially, I found myself sleeping on the couches of generous friends. You know that constant, nagging feeling of being an imposition, even when people tell you it's no problem. That was my reality every single day. I was immensely grateful for my friends' hospitality, but I was acutely aware that I couldn't stay forever. I was a temporary guest in their established lives. The hardest part was putting on a brave face, pretending everything was fine when my world had been turned upside down. I didn't want to constantly rehash what happened with Ethan and Sarah. I didn't want to be seen as bitter or obsessed, but in truth, it consumed my thoughts. It's not something you can just forget, your own brother discarding you like you meant nothing. But whenever someone asked how I was, I'd force a smile and say, "I'm figuring things out," as if it wasn't eating me alive from the inside. Couch surfing was a deeply unsettling experience. Lacking any stability, I was constantly moving my belongings in boxes and bags from one friend's place to another. There's something profoundly demoralizing about living out of boxes for an extended period. You feel perpetually on the brink of being asked to leave. Every morning when I left for work, I'd pack up my essentials, just in case. It was as if I didn't trust that I'd be welcomed back. Living with that level of uncertainty really messes with your head. I'll be honest, things were not good for a while. My job was okay, but it didn't pay enough for me to secure my own place immediately. I was trying desperately to save, but life has a way of interfering. Every time I felt like I was making progress, an unexpected expense would drain my savings. A car repair, a medical bill, groceries. It felt like I was trapped, treading water and struggling just to keep my head above the surface. I considered calling Ethan a few times, swallowing my pride and asking for help. But then the memory of how things ended would rush back, the ease with which he allowed Sarah to push me away. I couldn't go back there. The fact that he never once called to check on me after I left said everything. I was no longer a priority in his life. To Sarah, I was just a problem that had been conveniently solved. It's strange, though. You would think that being cast out by your own family would break you, but it did the opposite. It ignited a fire in me. I made a solemn vow to myself that I would never again depend on anyone else. I was tired of being let down, tired of feeling indebted to people just for a roof over my head. If I was going to get back on my feet, I was going to do it entirely on my own. So I started working with a renewed intensity, picking up extra shifts whenever they were available. I became ruthlessly frugal. No new clothes, no nights out, no unnecessary expenses. It was a difficult and lonely period, but after several months of relentless effort, I finally saved enough to get my own place. It was nothing glamorous, just a tiny one-room studio apartment in a less-than-desirable part of town. But it was mine. No more couch surfing. No more relying on the charity of others. I finally had a space that belonged to me, and it felt as though an immense weight had been lifted from my soul. I vividly remember the first night in my new apartment. I had very little furniture, just a mattress on the floor and my boxes of belongings. But it felt like absolute freedom. It was quiet, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't have to worry about being kicked out. I didn't have to walk on eggshells or cater to anyone else's moods. It was just me, and that was more than enough. Even as I felt a growing sense of pride in my independence, it didn't erase the pain. My thoughts still drifted back to Ethan and Sarah. I replayed how effortlessly they had disposed of me when I was no longer convenient for them. How Sarah's lies about me flirting with her and hanging out with drug addicts had been enough for Ethan to turn his back on me without giving me a chance to defend myself. Even though my life was improving, the sting of that betrayal remained. What made it worse was the complete silence from the rest of my family. Not my parents, not my other siblings. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I can only assume Ethan fed them his sanitized version of the story, and I wasn't a character they were interested in defending. My parents had always prioritized keeping the peace above all else, and I'm sure they concluded it was easier to let Ethan and Sarah have their way than to confront them about the injustice of it all. But it still hurt. It felt like I had been collectively erased from their lives. I focused on moving forward, though. I didn't have the luxury of wallowing in self-pity. I had bills to pay, and rent wasn't going to pay itself. So I continued to work hard, and slowly, things started to get better. I earned a promotion at work, which gave me some much-needed financial breathing room. I began to decorate my small apartment, turning it into a real home. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was proud of how far I had come on my own. Through this whole ordeal, I learned a harsh but valuable lesson. You cannot rely on other people to fix your life. No one is coming to rescue you. And sometimes, the very people you believe will always have your back are the ones who will push you down the hardest. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but it's the truth. You have to be your own advocate, your own safety net, because when everything else crumbles, you are the only one you can truly count on. Despite everything, I still wished things with Ethan had been different. I missed having a brother. I missed the way things were before Sarah came into the picture and systematically dismantled our relationship. But I knew I could never go back. I couldn't forget how they had treated me. I wasn't going to allow them back into my life, not after the damage they had done. They had made their choice, and I had to live with mine. By the time I truly felt like I was back on solid ground, I hadn't spoken to Ethan in over a year. Occasionally, he or Sarah would send a half-hearted text asking how I was, but I never replied. I couldn't bring myself to. I assumed they had moved on as well. They had their baby by now, and I was sure their life was picture perfect without me in it. But a part of me knew that you can't just treat family like that and expect no consequences. I didn't know it then, but the wheel of karma was slowly turning. And when it finally came full circle, it would change everything. I hadn't spoken a word to Ethan or Sarah for about a year after I moved into my own apartment. I had done my best to put that chapter of my life behind me, but you can't just erase family from your memory. From time to time, I'd contemplate reaching out, but then I'd remember how they cast me aside like I was nothing. The thought of Ethan believing Sarah's blatant lies over me still made my stomach churn. Then, one day, the call came. I was at my desk at work, half focused on a podcast, when my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen and was shocked to see Ethan's name. We hadn't spoken in what felt like a lifetime, so seeing his name pop up sent a jolt through me. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, let it go to voicemail, but some instinct told me to answer, so I did. "Hello," I said, my tone carefully neutral, betraying none of the emotions swirling inside me. There was a beat of silence on the other end before Ethan's voice crackled through, sounding thin and strained. He didn't sound like the confident, put-together older brother I remembered. He sounded desperate. "Hey," he said, "it's me." "Yeah, I know," I replied, unwilling to make this easy for him. Ethan hesitated, then let out a sigh. "Look, I'm just going to get straight to it. We need your help. Karen and I were losing the house. The business failed and we're being evicted. We have nowhere else to go." I could feel my heart begin to hammer against my ribs. After more than a year of silence, the first time Ethan calls is because he needs something. The irony was so thick it was almost laughable, considering what they'd put me through. A vindictive part of me wanted to hang up then and there and let them deal with their own mess, but another part of me, well, it was complicated. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, my voice as cold and steady as I could make it. "We were hoping," he paused, as if he couldn't quite believe the words he was about to say. "We were hoping you'd let us stay with you, just for a few months until we can get back on our feet." I was stunned into silence. My mind flashed back to that awful day, coming home to find my life packed up in the hallway, with Ethan just standing by while Sarah assassinated my character. And now they wanted to stay in my home. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You have got to be kidding me," I said. "I know how it sounds," Ethan said quickly, as if he anticipated my reaction. "But we have 2 kids now. We don't have anywhere else to turn. Please, we wouldn't be asking if this wasn't an emergency. An emergency." So now I was supposed to just forget everything and ride to their rescue because they were in a bind. Where was this urgent energy when I needed a place to stay, when Sarah threw me out based on lies and Ethan just stood by and let it happen? "Ethan, I don't know what to tell you," I said, my voice hardening. "You kicked me out when I needed help. Do you remember that? You and Sarah didn't seem to care then." Why should I care now? There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought he'd hang up, but then he spoke again, his tone softer now, as if the reality of his position was finally sinking in. "I know," he said. "I know we messed up. Sarah, she was wrong. And I was wrong for not standing up for you. I should have never let that happen. I should have had your back." Hearing him admit that was a strange mix of satisfaction and rage. It was the apology I had waited over a year to hear, but it felt hollow, too little and far too late. The damage was already done. What good is an apology now after all this time? "I needed you then, Ethan. I said, my voice starting to crack with emotion. I needed my brother and you let her lie about me. You let her paint me as some kind of creep, like I was hitting on her. You believed her over your own blood. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry, I truly am. But right now we are desperate. We have no one else. I'm asking you as your brother. Please, can we just stay with you? I sat there, the phone pressed hard against my ear, my mind in turmoil. A part of me wanted to tell him to get lost, to let him face the consequences of his actions. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the idea of family despite everything, was torn. They had put me through hell. But did that mean I should kick them when they were down? Was it my responsibility to be the bigger person here? I need some time to think about it, I finally said, my voice tight. I understand, Ethan said, clearly relieved that I hadn't outright refused. Take all the time you need. I really am sorry for everything. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. After we hung up, I just sat there, staring blankly at my phone. I wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. They had kicked me out without a second thought. And now they were begging me for shelter. It was like some kind of twisted, karmic joke. But the truth was, I had no idea what to do. I didn't want to be the kind of person who holds a grudge forever, but I also wasn't going to be a doormat again. If I let them in, would they just take advantage of me all over again? Or could this be a chance for us to finally grow up and move past what happened? I agonized over the decision for days. My phone buzzed with texts from Ethan, each one more desperate than the last, reminding me that their eviction date was fast approaching. My parents even got involved, sending me guilt-laden messages about how family sticks together and how I needed to let go of the past. But it wasn't that simple. Family is a two-way street. And for a very long time, it felt like I was the only one driving on it. Update 1. I sat with the phone in my hand for what felt like an eternity, weighing my decision. After several days of internal debate, I finally called Ethan back. He didn't pick up right away, so I left a brief message, telling him I had made my decision and to call me back when he could. As soon as I sent it, one part of me felt a sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. But another part was filled with anxiety, knowing that what happened next would either be a complete catastrophe or something that would irrevocably change our relationship. I wasn't sure which it would be, but I knew I had to stand by my choice. About an hour later, Ethan called back. His voice was tense, as if he'd been holding his breath ever since he got my message. "So, what did you decide?" he asked, skipping any pleasantries. I took a deep, steadying breath. "Look, Ethan, I've thought about this a lot," I started, trying to keep my voice even though my heart was pounding. "And I can't let you and Sarah stay with me." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" he finally asked, his tone a mix of disbelief and indignation. "After everything," I retorted, my own voice growing sharper. "You mean after you threw me out of your house without any warning based on a mountain of lies that Sarah made up? You made me homeless, Ethan. I had nowhere to go, so yes, I'm serious." I could hear his sharp intake of breath on the other end, as if he was trying to control his temper. "I told you I was sorry about that. We were under a lot of pressure. Sarah was pregnant. Things were just complicated." "Complicated?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You believed lies that I was hitting on your wife and hanging out with drug dealers. You didn't even give me the dignity of a conversation to defend myself. And now, just because things are tough for you, I'm supposed to wipe the slate clean and forget all of it." "I'm not asking you to forget," Ethan said, his voice rising with urgency. "I'm asking you for help. We have children now. This isn't just about me and Sarah anymore. We're your family." I felt a brief pang of guilt, but I refused to back down. Not after everything I had endured. Family? You weren't thinking about family when you kicked me out. You weren't thinking about family when you let Sarah slander me. I had to figure things out on my own, Ethan. Now it's your turn. There was another long, tense silence. I could hear the frustration in his breathing, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. "Look," I continued, softening my tone slightly. "I'm not saying I don't care at all, but I cannot let you stay in my home. I worked too hard to rebuild my life, and I'm finally in a stable, peaceful place. I can't risk letting you and Sarah come in and potentially destroy that all over again. You have to understand that, right?" "Yeah," Ethan mumbled, his voice deflated. "I get it." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but I was firm. I wasn't going to let him guilt me into submission. I had come too far for that. "I can help in other ways," I offered, feeling a need to offer some kind of olive branch. "I can help you research resources, maybe find some temporary shelters or programs you can apply to. But my home, my sanctuary, that is off limits." There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought he'd hung up. Then he let out a deep sigh of resignation. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet now. "I understand. I'm not happy about it, but I understand." I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was incredibly difficult to say no to my own brother, but I had to protect my own well-being. If I let him and Sarah back into my life in that way, I knew it would only be a matter of time before the old patterns returned, and I couldn't survive that again. "I really do hope things work out for you guys," I said, trying to end the conversation on a less hostile note. "I'm sorry things are so difficult for you right now." "Yeah, me too," Ethan muttered. "Thanks for whatever help you can offer." We exchanged a few more awkward words and then hung up. I sat there for a long time, letting it all sink in. I had said no. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself against my family, and it felt surreal. I was half proud, half sad. I hated the idea of this permanent rift between us, but I knew, without a doubt, that I had made the right decision for myself. I had to draw a line in the sand. In the following days, I kept replaying that conversation in my head. I didn't know if Ethan was furious with me or if he truly understood my perspective, but one thing was certain. I was no longer going to allow myself to be manipulated by guilt. My parents, predictably, found out and tried their usual family sticks together routine. They were appalled that I had said no, even after I explained in detail what Ethan and Sarah had done to me. It was as if they were incapable of seeing the larger picture. "You should have helped them," my mother said during one phone call. "They're your family and they're struggling. You've always been the helper. This isn't like you." That last line stung a little. Maybe it wasn't like me, but maybe that was the whole point. For my entire life, I was the one who went the extra mile for my family, regardless of how I was treated in return. But that was precisely why I had to say no this time. I wasn't that person anymore. I had grown. I had learned to set boundaries, and this was a critical one. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, trying to stay calm. "But for once, I have to put myself first. Ethan and Sarah will have to figure this out. My parents didn't get it, which I expected. They weren't the ones who had been thrown out and left to fend for themselves. They weren't the ones who had to build a life from scratch. I was, and I refused to let anyone make me feel guilty for protecting what I had fought so hard to create. After that, things went quiet for a while. I didn't hear from Ethan or Sarah, which was a relief. They had their own problems to deal with, and I had my own life to live. I did send them a list of local resources and shelters, and that was the last contact we had. No more desperate calls.